Hello everyone, my name is Dakoba and welcome to Satisfactory. The Satisfactory 1.0 launch is just a few days away and I am very excited for it, but before we get into that we have to finish up this world, and that's what we're going to be doing today in this mega episode that'll wrap up our Update 8 Let's Play. We're going to start off by sending away our Phase 3 space elevator, and then take a look at trains and a variety of late game factories including a nuclear power plant, before finishing the game by sending our Phase 4 space elevator and unlocking Employee of the Planet. Let's get into it. Alright, now our first task on our to-do list was to complete the Phase 3 space elevator. Fortunately, we have all the parts we need to do that. In previous episodes, we built factories for the last tier of space elevator parts, as well as computers, heavy modular frames, circuit boards, motors, and basic oil products, which are all the things we need for the remaining space elevator parts. For the ones for tier 3. The versatile framework is actually a tier 2 part. We've just kept that production going and we built up a massive stockpile of those. And then the adaptive control units and modular engines require the parts that we previously set up. So instead of building a new dedicated factory, I've simply been shuttling items from our storage system over at our sort of central hub there into these containers, and I'll continue to do this while we work on Phase 4. This has given me plenty of parts to finish this space elevator, which we'll send off in just a moment, but also to start building a stockpile, because these components are subsequently used in the Phase 4 space elevator parts. So in addition to the ones that are being produced, we have storage containers full of both of those components. Now this has been running for several dozen hours, and so that's how we managed to build up these stockpiles. We're just going to let it keep running and make use of those stockpiles when the time comes. Let's complete Phase 3 and get started on our late game factories. Alright, now if we open up the hub, that will let us see what we have unlocked in Tier 7. And now bauxite refinement is where we're going to start. That's going to give us aluminum, which is important because the aluminum sheets are used for the Logistics Mark V belts, the Mark V conveyor belts. It's also going to open up the hover pack, which makes building so much easier. Once we have those belts, we'll be able to do radio control units, which are a component for the rest of the game, as well as opening up aeronautical engineering and drones, which we'll use mostly for resource gathering, but also for dangerous logistics, like if we need to transport nuclear fuel waste, for example. With aeronautical engineering unlocked, that'll give us the battery and supercomputer, and from there we can open up Tier 8, in particular nuclear power, which will give us one of our components, as well as our power option for the endgame. Advanced aluminum production, which will give us a number of other necessary components, in particular the cooling system and fused modular frame, and then the last two milestones for both our highest tier of miner as well as our final space elevator parts. Let's go ahead and get this milestone sent off and pop on over and take a look at our aluminum factory, see what we can do with it. Alright, now we are over here at our city, and I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do. I've set up this this turbo fuel power plant. I did a video guide on this if you want to see this build and go through it. This is going to provide power until we are able to set up a nuclear power plant later on. But what it's going to do is help frame our city. It's at a little bit of an angle. I wish I'd lined it up better, but it is what it is. But I'm not going to tear it down and rebuild it. Instead, that's something that we'll make sure to have right going forward. What we are going to be doing is using train lines in order to provide for a variety of endgame factories in this region. Now, we may set up some site factories at other places. So, for example, when we get to particle enrichment at the very end game, we're going to need a ton of copper powder. But that requires several hundred copper a piece. So rather than shipping in the raw copper ore or even the copper ingots, we'll refine that on site and then process it into the copper powder and then bring that in, just so that we have smaller logistics requirements for that. But for the most part, we're going to be bringing in everything via either drone or train to this location. Now what we're going to do is set up a main train line that will run right through the middle of this, and then we'll build factories on either side of this. This will also give us the option to branch out. For example, if we want to set up our nuclear power plant over on the edge of the map where the radiation is not going to be as big of a problem, we'll be able to create a branching train line that runs back there and set that up in the, out in the no man's land. It'll also give us the option to use some of our existing logistics areas and places where I've cleared out the jungle for truck lines in order to run new train lines if I want to. Now, before we get into the build for aluminum, I want to talk a little bit about what the process is going to be. You can see that I've set up our main platform that will eventually have a train line running the length of it, as well as factories on both sides of it. And we're just going to set up train stations all along the length of it, which will then go out into factories nearby. Now, this looks quite small at this distance, but there's about a 25 foundation gap between those two, like the edge of the structures that are already in place in that central line. So there's plenty of room to build there. And there's an even larger gap on the outside. You can even see the line where the world sort of ends there. So we've got, I think, close to 60 foundations that we can work with on that side. So there's plenty of room to work with. I'm not worried about running out of space at this time. And if we do, we can always build up or in other locations. But we're going to finish that train line and set up our first station. And what we're going to do at that station is we're going to be bringing in bauxite ore. Now, bauxite ore is the basis for aluminum products in Satisfactory. Our first task is going to be to combine that bauxite with water to create alumina solution. So this is another reason we're working in this area, is that many of our builds today will require a significant amount of water, and by being able to place water extractors on site, that's going to save us a lot of headache in terms of logistics. We'll combine the bauxite and water to create the alumina solution. Now, this process will also produce some quartz, although there is an alternate recipe we're going to be making use of that avoids using the quartz. If you do have that quartz, you can either use it later on in the production chain or sink it, because there are alternate recipes that sort of eliminate all the extra byproducts of this chain, and we're going to be making use of those. Now, the alumina solution is then sent into a refinery where it's mixed with coal to produce aluminum scrap. Now, that process also generates some additional water, so we're going to recycle that water back into our alumina solution production, and that means we'll be able to underclock the water generators that we're using there in order to create a nice, safe, reusable buffer, and we'll set up some priority pipelines there. That aluminum scrap can then be turned into aluminum ingots. The default for this recipe requires the use of silica. So if you're using the default recipe for alumina solution, you can save the silica and use that, although you will need to supplement it a little bit. It's not quite a perfect ratio there, but there is an alternate called the pure aluminum ingot that works in simply a smelter rather than a foundry and does not require silica. Once we have those aluminum ingots, we'll be able to turn those into aluminum casings, and then also pair it with copper ingots to produce all-clad aluminum sheets. And the all-clad aluminum sheets are probably one of the things we're going to need the most stockpiled, because they're the Mark V belt materials. Although we do have containers upon containers of the encased industrial beams, the Mark IV materials, so we'll certainly be continuing to use a lot of those where it's appropriate. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. All right, and that is an aluminum factory all complete. You can see we've also set up our radio control factory. Let's go through them. The aluminum factory is just like our design said. We have our bauxite coming in out of the train station here and going into 2 refineries to create the alumina solution. That's being combined with water from our 2 water extractors that's being piped over underneath. That alumina solution is then being sent forward into these next 2 refineries where it's being combined with coal. That coal is also being sent in via train line and then being shipped over underneath the floorboards there, because this structure here with the 2 refineries so close to each other was a little tricky to make look right. In retrospect, I might have left a little more space there, but sending the logistics underneath the floors works well, looks nice, so that's what we ended up doing there. Those are creating the aluminum scrap and then also creating some excess water, so that water is being combined with the water from the extractors and then being sent back into the first set of refineries. Now, by having the refineries feeding the water pipes from above and the extractors feeding the water pipes from beneath, the water from the refineries is prioritized, and so that it will always use that water and the system should never back up in that way. Now, the aluminum scrap then is being sent into a set of smelters using the pure aluminum ingot alternate recipe to create our aluminum ingots, which are then being sent into some constructors to create our aluminum casings, and into some assemblers where we're combining them with some copper to create our all-clad aluminum sheets. And you can see we have already backed up on both of those. And the aluminum casings should be flowing because we're using them over in our radio control unit factory as well, so that is also being sent over, and we're doing some logistics under the floor here. I'm not going to take a look at that because it's just belts and splitters. But over here at our radio control unit factory, you can see we've got a train coming in now. It's this yellow one. And this one is pretty straightforward. We're starting off, we're actually doing a couple of sort of sub-factories here. On the right-hand side here, we're producing some crystal oscillators, and on the left, we're producing some computers. So in order to accommodate that, we are bringing in some crude oil, which we're then refining in those refineries. Looks like we have a pipeline that's out of alignment there, so we'll fix that. But that's being turned into rubber, and then the petroleum coke from that is being sent over into that third refinery, where it's being turned into, or sorry, the heavy oil residue is being turned into petroleum coke in that third refinery, and then those are being combined, the rubber and the petroleum coke, into circuit boards using the electrode circuit board alternate recipe there. And then the circuit boards, the rubber and deuterium, or quick wire, which we're bringing in, are going into computer production. And then the computers, as well as the crystal oscillators and the aluminum casings from over yonder are what's being combined into our radio control units. Let's see how we're doing on those. Okay, so we're up to well, several stacks, probably over 1,000 radio control units there. And that has been running while I went out and found the vanes and set up the train lines for our Supercomputer Factory, which you can see we are setting up here. And that's going to be our next build. What we're bringing in here is some plastic, which we're refining over on the Spire Coast there, and then Caterium, which we're also getting from the Northern Forest and refining on site. Anytime where we have sort of a single production step or a single production line, I'm just going to be doing that refinement on site as much as I can. So for example, with Caterium, we're not using Caterium for anything except quickwire. So it's just as simple for me to ship in the ore and then smelt it and send it through constructors on site as it is for me to do all that at the location we're mining and just send in the quickwire. And since quickwire comes in such large stacks, you can actually ship it very quickly. So it's one of the reasons I like doing that, supposing we have the belts to manage it on either side. So while this system is running, let's go ahead and jump into our supercomputer time lapse, and then we'll go through that build once it's done. All right, and that is a Supercomputer Factory all complete. We are starting by bringing in some plastic, some quick wire, and some copper ingots, as well as bringing over some computers, which we're producing over at our radio control unit factory, and then processing them here. We're taking the copper ingots and turning them into copper sheets for use in creating AI limiters. We are then taking the remaining copper ingots and turning them into wire and then into cable in a set of constructors. So the wire then gets sent into another bank of constructors for production into cable. Now the copper sheeting is being combined with quick wire to produce AI limiters. We also have quick wire going into some production of circuit boards, as well as being sent forward directly. Now the circuit boards, the quick wire, and the cabling are being used to make high-speed connectors. Now the plastic, the AI limiters, the computers, and the high-speed connectors are being combined to create supercomputers. And those are flowing down here into a storage chest, which we will build a nice stockpile of, and then eventually be able to make use of those going forward in some future factories. Now our next factory build is going to be batteries, and we're going to be making a ton of batteries because the second part of that build is a huge drone airport. We're going to set up battery production that should support around 150 drones. I don't think we'll use that many, and I think the drone airport I might start with even just 30 or 40 drones. We'll see how it plays out. But I've worked out that if I want to use drones exclusively for resource gathering and decide to move off of trains, that 150 drones should be about right. That's a lot of drones, and the big problem that we're going to run into there is actually power. But we'll take a look at that once we get it built. Let's get into it. All right, and that is a battery factory and drone airport all complete. Let's go through it. We are starting by bringing in some bauxite and some sulfur. Now, the sulfur is being combined with water in some refineries to create some sulfuric acid, which is being sent directly into our blenders for use in the batteries. The bauxite is much more interesting, however. We're bringing that over and combining that with some water to create some alumina solution, and the alumina solution is then being sent forward into a couple of different pathways. Alumina solution is actually a component for the batteries as well, so we've got one pipeline going over to feed those. The rest is being sent into some more refineries to create aluminum scrap, and the aluminum scrap is then being refined into aluminum ingots and turned into aluminum casings. So the casings, the alumina solution, and the sulfuric acid are creating the batteries, as well as some extra water. And the water is partly what's providing the water for each of these things. So under the floorboards, all of these are hooked up. And then the batteries are being sent over into this drone airport, which is mostly an aesthetic choice because they are then, that drone airport, when there is room, will unload at this one on the corner, which is then going into a storage system underneath and being distributed to the drone airports that are actually in use. All right, now taking a look at the drone airport, you can see that the vast majority of these are turned off. That's simply because we don't have enough power right now to power everything. We are running into some power issues. We seem to have a problem at our coal power plant, so I'll have to get that sorted out. But if we look at our power production, you can see that we're producing about 6,600 megawatts. We should be producing about 10 gigawatts, so we're missing about 3,400 megawatts, and I'll have to figure that out, but I think 3,200 of it is our coal power plant, which is currently offline, so we'll have to sort that out. I think that's the use of vehicles there, which I've run into a lot of issues with vehicles, so I'm hoping that those get fixed in 1.0, because it's kind of been a pain to have to fix that. They just seem to, sometimes a vehicle randomly stops, and when other vehicles drive through the same space, they queue up behind it and just idle waiting for space to go. And so that front vehicle ends, sort of shuts down the line, even though there's not, it doesn't actually throw a flag as being in deadlock or any sort of problem like that. In any case, our next step is going to be to build some new power. And so we are going to be setting up a nuclear power plant. And that is something that I've been working on. So what we have here is a number of drones that are all set up. And I want to talk a little bit about how we're using them. We're using a hub system for these. And so if we take a look at this first one, you can see that I've named this nuclear power iron. And if we take a look at its details, we have another port that is creating nuclear power iron supply. And that is where we're mining iron and smelting it into iron ingots and then loading it onto a drone, which are flying it over here. This one then takes that and sends it to the nuclear power iron out, which is at the location where we're going to be building our nuclear plant. And you can see that we're doing the same for copper, for steel, for let's see, what do we have here? Deuterium, for quartz, raw quartz, for sulfur, and for uranium as well. And so each of these are being picked up, and these are being tuned so that they're producing just a hair more. So very slowly end up with a little bit more of a stockpile there, but we should be okay. We've got our hazmat suit all set up, so we're not worried about that. But these 7 ports are handling all of the logistics for our nuclear power plant. And then the next 3 ports and all of these other ones, we can hook those up as we want. We can run logistics underneath the floorboards to make sure that everything looks nice. Looks like we've got some holes where I've been down there doing some work. But we'll get those patched up as well. And that will do it. So let's go ahead and get our nuclear power plant set up, and then we'll go through that build as well. Let's get into it.
All right, and that is a nuclear power plant all complete. What we are doing here is we are using smart splitters to bring in everything on one line. So we're shipping in everything via drones, like we discussed, and sending that all down here, which is then being sent into smart splitters to sort it out into various containers. Anything that doesn't fit gets sunk, so nothing backs up. And then this is where we are producing our infused uranium fuel cells here. So if we come over here and take a look at this, yeah, we're creating our uranium fuel rod using the uranium fuel unit alternate recipe. Those are then being sent via drone over to our reactors, and then the waste is then being sent off into the desert. Now, the design for this factory, I've actually done a full video guide on. I'll post a link to that in the description below so you guys can take a look at that. But the basic idea is that each of these sections creates a different subcomponent. So our first one over here creates the uranium fuel cells, and then the second one creates beacons. Now this recipe is actually going to be changing in 1.0, and they've actually announced the recipe change here. This will be a rotor recipe, which will actually simplify the recipe quite a bit. But beacons themselves are a pure iron recipe, and rotors are a pure iron recipe. So the core design will still work. It's just which machines are placed here will be a little different. So instead of having sort of, you know, a more complex setup with a manufacturer, you would just have some assemblers producing the rotors out of rods and screws. Now our third section here is producing some crystal oscillators, and our fourth one is producing the electromagnetic control rods. And then those are again being turned into the uranium fuel cells, which are then being sent over into the nuclear production. Looks like we may have a shortage, one of them flipping off there, so I'll have to switch it off there. So we'll have to take a look at that. But in general, we're producing close to 30 megawatts, 30 gigawatts of power, 30,000 megawatts of power, and that is right where we're going to want to be to make sure that no matter what happens, and especially as we start building the remainder of our factories, we have plenty to work with. It'll also let us use that drone airport to its fullest potential. Our next build is going to be a nitrogen port, I think. We're going to be bringing in some liquid nitrogen via train line, and then using that to create our fused modular frames as well as our cooling systems. And then after that, we've got our turbomotors, I think is the one after that. So we'll do both of those next as a time lapse and then go through the build. Let's get into it.
All right, and that is a nitrogen depot as well as a turbomotor factory all complete. Let's go through it. So we're starting off by, originally I was just going to bring in some nitrogen and have essentially a nitrogen pumping station, use trains to effectively transport that node from where it is on the map to here. So we're bringing in the same amount of nitrogen that the node is producing. It's just in a different location, so it's a little bit easier to use. That was the original plan here, and then I was going to have each of these as separate factories. But I realized that since we have the drone airport, this is a perfect opportunity for us to take advantage of that. So you can see I've started color coding the drone airport. So we've got the green for our nuclear reactor, which I've ended up doubling the production on just to make sure that we have plenty of resources for it. And then I've set up some blue ones for our nitrogen facility here and some yellow ones for our turbo motors. Now, what we're doing with those drones is bringing in resources from other factories. So, for example, one of the resources we're bringing in is rubber, which we're getting over at our original rubber supply depot. We have enough rubber stockpiled that we're not going to need that anymore. So that production has actually been diverted to deliver over here now. Now, what we're doing here is we're actually creating fused modular frames and cooling systems. Now, the fused modular frames take heavy modular frames, which we're importing from our frame factory, and then aluminum casings, which you can see we're actually using that bridge to import it from our aluminum factory over there. So those are coming in and then being combined with the nitric acid or nitrogen gas to create the fused modular frames. And then those are going into a storage container, which is not presently hooked up to things, but will be used extensively later on. Now over here on the other side, we are taking some rubber that we're bringing in from our basic oil refinery, as well as some more aluminum casings, which are being combined to create heat sinks. Those heat sinks are being combined with the nitrogen gas, as well as motors from our steel plant, which you can just see off in the distance there. And those are being turned into the cooling systems. Now those cooling systems are likewise being stockpiled, and you can see we've started to get a nice stockpile of those built up. Now over here at our turbomotor plant, we have a large section dedicated to producing rotors. So that's a line of iron ingots coming in that are being turned into iron rods and screws. Those are then being turned into rotors, which are being sent forward. Some of those rotors are being combined with some stators that we're producing to create new motors on site. And then the stators and the rotors and the motors, some radio control units, which we're bringing in from over yonder, as well as some electromagnetic control rods, which we are producing out of stators and cookwire, are being turned into turbo motors here, and we are starting to build up a nice little stockpile of those as well. Now, with all of these builds completed, we are actually in an excellent place, because we now have every component that we need for our final space elevator parts. And you can see I've actually taken down our space elevator over at our starter factory. We're going to be rebuilding that here, as well as setting up all of our production for everything we need to finish the game. Let's get into it.